Or, thank you for having us. We've done a series of different community events with Sephardic Community Center over the years, and we're always thrilled to certainly partner with you on these things. And as we were talking about doing this, relevant to the elder law side of it and the planning and what goes into that, and then the other side of what happens with elder abuse, fraud, etc., and how there are two distinct areas, but there's definitely some parallels and some intersection, as you can imagine, which our speakers will go into. And speaking of our speakers, we're very fortunate today to have two dynamic women speaking and representing their area. So and I'll read a little bit about them. We have Debby Rosenfeld, who is an associate with Ronald Fatoullah and Associates, and Michelle Weber, who is a chief of the Elder Abuse Unit at the Kings County District Attorney's Office. So welcome both of you, and thank you so much for dedicating your time tonight for this event. The title today is Elder Law Matters, and that matters can have two different, it's kind of like a double entendre. It matters, and we have matters, and protecting yourself and from potential pitfalls. So we'll talk about estate planning, key documents that you need, and then segueing into how family relationships and partnerships play a part, and also tips for, and also education about, financial abuse and what goes into that. So let me tell you a little bit about our speakers. First, we have Michelle Weber from Kings County District Attorney's Office. Michelle has been an assistant district attorney in Brooklyn since 2001. She has handled numerous, can you imagine how many, right? Special victims investigations and prosecutions. In 2014, she was promoted to Deputy Bureau Chief in the Domestic Violence Bureau, where she supervised the Integrated Domestic Violence Part in Kings County Supreme Court. Then in 2016, Michelle was promoted to Chief of the Elder Abuse Unit, which handles cases of intimate partner and family violence of victims who are over the age of 60. I have to stop and just tell you that in my years of working with the Kings County District Attorney's Office, it's always been very admirable how this office is dedicated to education and really getting word out about issues like this. It's really very important. So we're thrilled to have them with us tonight. Michelle has been a lifelong New Yorker. She was born and raised in Brooklyn. I bet you walked this bridge behind me a couple of times, Michelle.
A few.
Just a little bit, the unit has a strong community presence, as I mentioned before, throughout Brooklyn through various committees, teams, and initiatives. So congratulations for all the work that you do in this area and dedicating to the community. And Debby will be speaking after Michelle, and a little bit about Debby. After practicing as a tax attorney for many years in both the legal and corporate arena, Debby decided to enter the field of elder law. And thank you for doing that, Debby. You changed the lives of a lot of people over the years.
You're very welcome.
And she's been engaged in the practice ever since. Debby is very involved with estate planning and the preparations of wills and trusts, and is very knowledgeable regarding tax matters. She's been with our firm for over 15 years. So with that being said, Michelle, you're on. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. So I just put up the PowerPoint. You guys can see it right before I start. Is everyone see that? Am I good to go?
You're good.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so I always think it's important to start with when we talk about seniors in Brooklyn, I think it's always important to start with the numbers. And you can see them for yourselves. I mean, they're pretty compelling. These are still from the 2010 census. We have not, the city has not broken down for us the 2020 census because of COVID supposedly, but the numbers here are pretty staggering. So 17% at 2010 made people over the age of 60 made up most of the city's population. And if you take 30% of that number, they're people between the ages of 60 and 64. So what that means is we have a rapidly aging population. 1 in 3 are over 75 and 1 in 10 are over 85. And it's the fastest growing population in the city. So besides the need to make elder abuse a priority, it's going to have to be a priority because people over the age of 60 are going to be a dominant force in, just by sheer numbers in the city. And it's only getting older. So, if you look at the trends, the young elderly, which are people that we consider between 60 and 64, will be 31% of the population as the baby boomers age. And then by 2030, we're looking at, seniors will outnumber school-age children in the city. Brooklyn specifically has, over 400,000 seniors right now. And these are the numbers that become relevant to the work that I do. So about 32% live with a disability and about 20% live in poverty. At this point, we handle over 500 cases per year. And those are the cases that are active. We have lots of cases that involve arrests that don't go anywhere very quickly because people are uncooperative, and we'll talk about why people won't cooperate. We have 33, we've had since 1999, we've had 33 DV homicides. In 2019, we had 3. And the truth is in 2020, I didn't add this to the slide, we've had about 6 homicides. Most of them in 2020, not most of them, all of them were a grandchild killing a grandparent. Okay, so when we talk about elder abuse, we're talking about physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological and emotional abuse, neglect, and financial abuse. Now, normally or typically the cases that we're seeing, we're having these abuses going on at the same time. So they're co-occurring. We're going to get into each one specifically, and we're going to talk about, the impact of each one. So when we talk about physical abuse, we're talking about non-accidental force causing an injury, pain, or impairment. So typically what we see at the misdemeanor level, and misdemeanor cases make up a bulk of what we do. So those are cases involving crimes that are punishable by less than a year of jail. So those cases involve slaps, pushing, burns, and improper physical restraint. The slaps and the pushing and the burns, those, you can make sense of. The improper physical restraint, not make sense of, but you can imagine what that looks like. The improper physical restraint is all far too common. We see people that don't want to take care of the old folk in their life. So they literally will tie them in a bed to help them from eloping, or make sure that they stay in one place. So they only have to clean up one part of the house. It is such a common thing. And when we talk about restraint, I've seen people handcuffs to bed or handcuffed to doors. I've seen them tied to doors with just rags. And I bring it up because what should be shocking and terrible is common in the work that we do. Sexual abuse. Now, this is something nobody ever wants to talk about when we talk about family violence, but it's forced sexual contact. It's with self or forcing sexual contact with another person. It happens frequently. The other part of this that we have to talk about is when we talk about intimate partner violence, folks, just because they're over a certain age doesn't mean that they're not being sexually active. But when you're sexually active, it also means that you're going to have issues around consent. People are not agreeing to sex. Even if they're married, they can still say no. There is something called marital rape. It exists. It's real. I've had folks that have been married for 50 years, and when we're somebody will come in for something, and then we start talking, and through the intake, they'll be like, "Oh, I was allowed to say no." They don't know. And Brooklyn is comprised of so many people from so many different cultures and so many different religious backgrounds. And, everyone's sensibility around sex is very, very specific to their culture and their upbringing. And, marital rape is something that goes on even if you've been married for 50, 60 years and you're the grandparent of 40, 50 people. It is something that we talk about on our intake. And it's a question that really, it's an issue and a problem that really does exist. And within that context, we do deal with a lot of incest as well. Physical and emotional abuse is, when people deliberately inflict mental or emotional distress by threat, humiliation, intimidation, or other abusive conduct. So a lot of this comes to like the power and control. And an abuser is always trying to control the abusee. So how do they do that? With when we're talking about old folks, we talk about people, keeping them away from their friends, keeping them away from their family, or it's often one family member who takes control of the situation and doesn't let the senior see their other children or their friends, or go to their houses of worship. Anything to really just say, you are completely reliant on me. And they do that to maintain control and maintain power. And, when you're talking about seniors, especially over the last year, where, during COVID, when seniors were really scared to leave their homes, they were stuck with their abusers, and they were petrified of their abusers, but also without their abuser, they'd have no contact with the outside world. So that a mental and emotional abuse, creating that power and control dynamic, became so real for so many of these folks. And these are some examples of isolation and control. So, they don't let people speak to other people. We often see and we work very closely with, of course, NYPD, and I'll say, can you do a wellness check? It's a thing that the police department does, where they check on people, not only seniors, people that, we are investigating, we're just, we're concerned about their well-being. The abuser will often not let the police in it, or only speak to the police only speak to the senior while the abuser is present. So we at the DA's office, over the course of the last few years, through a grant, have managed to train the entire NYPD at this point, all the domestic violence officers, in best practices and interviewing techniques. And part of that is speaking to the senior alone without anyone in the room, so they're not afraid to disclose if there's something going on. And like I mentioned before, when we look at isolation and control, we talk about preventing the senior from attending religious services, doctor's visits, any of those things. This is relevant to the Sephardic Community Center. You have people that are frequent flyers, right? That come for certain things all the time. You have regular customers, so to speak. When you see people not showing up all of a sudden without any rhyme or reason, it's questionable, and you want to say, is everything okay? And when you see that somebody new has come into their lives, or a child has just moved back, an adult child has moved back in with them, or a grandchild, it's suspicious. Like, why aren't you coming to the senior center? What is preventing you from coming all of a sudden? And a huge red flag for us is when they start firing home health aides. Abusers don't want anyone in the house, because with someone in the house, they have witnesses, right? So anybody that has a typical relationship will typically want to have help in the house, because otherwise they have to provide the help. And, caring for a senior is really hard work. So in a typical situation, people would welcome the help in their house. So if they're all of a sudden firing people for no reason, or not letting the home health aide, gain access to the senior, that's also very suspicious activity, from what we've learned. Emotional control is, exactly that, trying to really maintain power through emotional control. So there's yelling and screaming, really sort of scaring them straight, property damage, sentimental items. That's a really big thing, and it's an interesting thing, because sentimental items are very hard for seniors. They're very hard to place a dollar value on. We had a woman once who came in, and her son was abusing her, and she had brought from her country a prayer book that she found. She was just so sentimentally attached to it. I think it's been passed down from generation to generation, and he deliberately ripped it up. And there's no money values. There's not really much we can charge by the way of criminal mischief, because it has to have some sort of money value to it. But it was so raw for her. It's so awful, but it was a means of her saying to her, I can destroy everything that's important to you. Lots of threats to injure people around them, put them in nursing homes, threats to remove, threats to kill a pet. Very often our seniors are so attached to their pets. It's usually, the thing that they dote most on. And, people and they threaten to kill them or threaten to injure them. Or we've had a guy who was dangling the pet dog out the window. It was terrifying for this woman. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are common things that we see. And I bring them up and I use them just, to give folks a red flag, for, what to look out for when we're talking about emotional control. Okay, so neglect is a favorite topic of mine. There are a couple of kinds of neglect. You have active neglect, which is, the willful failure to fulfill care functions. There's passive neglect, so non-willful failure, but like people that just don't do what they're supposed to be doing, meaning you allow the senior who, let's say, has some incontinence issues, like not change their adult diapers and let them sit in a soiled diaper. And then there's self-neglect, which is most likely the thing that we see all the time, is when people can't care for themselves anymore. Neglect is a funny thing because there is no neglect statute in New York. We don't prosecute for neglect. The only way we could prosecute for neglect is if we can prove that somehow the caretaker had some sort of duty. And, oftentimes when we're talking about family members that are caring for seniors, we're talking about people that don't have any formal, kind of contract, and they're not, formally being paid. They might be taking money from the senior, but there's no formal understanding of what those functions are. So for us to have to say, well, you actively neglected to do this, it was willful, like, well, I wasn't in charge of that. And there's really no full-on neglect. Like, they don't talk about it in the penal code. They don't talk about it. So we've had to get creative. It's something that I've brought up at other prosecutors association meetings, and all the prosecutors are in agreement that we need to come up with something, but the legislator is just not there yet. And just going back to self-neglect, it's an inability to care for themselves because they're mentally or physically impaired. What we're seeing also in a large number of the cases that are coming across my desk at this point are adult children that have either an intellectual disability or some mental health issues, and not even like on a criminal level, they're just unable to care for themselves, but they've been living at home their entire lives, and now they're at home with seniors who can't care for themselves, who formerly were caring for their impaired child. So you have two sort of very vulnerable adults in the home, and it's something that's becoming very, very routine and coming across my desk, and not so much because, and not rarely because it's criminal, more because people don't have anywhere to call and they're trying to figure out how to get, people the help that they need. But it is something that's very, very common. And, as service providers and, just people in the community, I implore you, there are many of these situations out there. And it's just something to look out for people that are, seniors who have been taking care of impaired children who are now adults, and kind of everyone's sort of compromised at this point. So what do abusers look like? And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is typically what we see. So it's adult children, grandchildren, or other family members that live with the senior. Now, they don't have to have a substance abuse issue or mental health issue, but they often do, and they often have both. And they're typically unemployed, and most of the time they are begging for money, taking money, demanding money, and that's the typical dynamic. We do see some cases where we have adult seniors who are just lonely, and they make a friend in the park and they bring that person home and they can't get them out. So they're not necessarily related, but they become, sometimes intimate partners, or they come up with strange living arrangements. And then we have a problem. And I bring this up because especially during COVID, we had a lot of folks and that were lonely, and they took, a younger roommate, and then that roommate, there's been a moratorium on evictions that supposedly go back into effect in August, and they've been living there basically, taunting the seniors, not wanting to get out, refusing to leave, and really living there rent free, and there's nothing anyone can do. So it's just something to look out for, because when people are lonely, I think they compromise their judgment in order to sort of, even though they know it's not a great thing to do, but they're so lonely that they'll let people stay in their homes. It's just something to watch out for. So when we interview victims, we always speak to them alone. We don't speak to them with their adult children, even though they want them in the room. We don't speak to them with their home health aides in the room. We speak to them alone, because the only time we're really going to get the information we need is when nobody else is clouding their judgment. We try to keep it very minimal distractions. We often do interviews along with the police, because we don't want to make anyone have to tell their story 600 times to 7 different people when, all of it is really just so emotionally fraught. So we ask them to keep their weapons and radios low. And that again goes back to, we deal with folks from all over the world, and not everyone has a great experience with the police, depending on where they come from and what their sensibilities are. So and a lot of people, I've heard them say to me, like, well, the police are corrupt and you're corrupt. And I'm like, all right. But, I think that we really try to keep it as low profile as possible so that people really feel comfortable telling us what's going on. We often ask for bathroom breaks, food, water, and meds. Meds are really crucial. I think people have showed up in my office and like, well, I take my meds at 10. I'm like, it's 9:30. Like, what's the game plan? So before they come, we often ask them to please make sure whatever medications they take to come. And like with respect to food, we have a program, at the office through a grant that we're able to provide lunch and breakfast and just, meals for people that need it while they're with us. So this is the big part. So how we investigate and prosecute these cases. I will tell you that DA Gonzalez, who's my boss, and he's the current prosecutor, he's the lead prosecutor in Brooklyn. He's the district attorney. He's really, really committed to elder abuse. He gives me carte blanche, whatever support I need, because everyone realizes that it is a vulnerable population. And, we need to make sure that people that live in the city feel safe in the city. So, we take on these investigations and these prosecutions, and we take them very, very seriously. So the way I run my unit is, I am comprised of, for sure, assistant district attorneys. I'm a lawyer, they're all lawyers, but we also have dedicated social workers who are outstanding. And part of the reason that I rely so much on the social workers is because, in my experience, it seems, because we do family violence and intimate partner violence, every one of our victims is related or involved with their perpetrator. And that dynamic is so complicated for victims, because who wants to prosecute their son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, or their husband of 50 years? So if a lawyer to reach out, a prosecutor to reach out, I really think, and I know this, people are like, no, I'm not putting my kid in jail. I'm not putting my husband in jail. I'm not doing it. Whereas if a social worker reaches out, at the very least, a social worker will be able to assess what the social service needs are. So even if they're not cooperative with respect to a prosecution, at the very least, we're able to service them on a social service level. And hopefully, and really the aim is always to keep everyone safe. So at least we can endeavor to do that outside of the prosecution. So that immediate outreach is always done by a social worker on every single case. And they get, we have our own intake that we work, our intake is, I think, an excellent intake. It's been modeled across the country because it's succinct, it's quick, and it really asks questions that really try to do a risk assessment and a social service need. So we can really, really figure out safety and what we can do to get them there. We provide car services if people want it. I've been to as soon as hospitals let us in, post-COVID nursing homes or, assisted living centers, we take the show on the road. We provide cell phones if they need it. So we also make a ton of social service referrals. And the one thing we're always asked about is housing. Everybody needs housing. Everybody wants housing. Housing is complicated. There is one emergency shelter up in Riverdale, the Weinberg Center, that is for seniors alone. It's exclusively for seniors, and it's actually, it's a very hard vetting process because they really only want victims of crime and they want them to be seniors. But it's actually, if God forbid anybody ever needs it, it's not like a typical shelter. It's really, really like the facility is quite nice, and anybody would feel comfortable there. We work very closely with the NYPD. So this is maybe not such a well-known fact, but I work very closely with 1PP. I'm constantly at meetings with them. NYPD they call it, we call them seniors, they call them the elderly. I think that when we're dealing with people in their 50s and the 60s, as I get closer to 50, I kind of take issue with that. But they take senior crime very, very seriously. They are our partners. We work hand in hand with them. It goes all the way to the top. So I'm on a call once a week with 1PP, and we do all the most vulnerable cases with them. Any open investigations, anything. So we work really in tandem to make sure that we're doing the work that we need to do. The MDT is the multidisciplinary team. So that is a team that meets twice a month, and it's comprised of every social service agency that services seniors in Brooklyn. And what it does is we pull the most important cases, and by important, not important, the most serious cases, the most high-risk cases, and we sit there with all the partnering agencies. So that's Adult Protective Services, DFTA, JASA, NICEAC. It's all the big social service agencies that work with seniors. And we see these are the most vulnerable cases we have. How do we come together, along with NYPD, how do we come together and make sure that these very vulnerable seniors are safe? And everybody gets a task, and you're called on the carpet. And if you haven't done your part, then everyone's going to know it. So it's actually a really effective tool. The other really great thing about it is that if we get something that comes across my desk and it's not necessarily criminal, but it definitely walks a line and it really needs a lot of intervention, I could bring that to the MDT and be like, listen, I can't prosecute this case, but you need to help these folks. VEPT is the vulnerable elder persons team. So it's a program that was started out at Cornell, and it's now being modeled not only nationally but internationally. And it's an emergency service program. So if there's a senior who ends up in an emergency room and someone takes a look and says something's going on here, they could be brought to the Cornell emergency room, where you'll have a multidisciplinary response. You get a geriatric social worker, psychiatrist, benefits worker, geriatrician. They all put eyes on this one person, and they say, okay, this is what we're looking at. It was based off the model of sort of kind of what happened in child abuse in the 70s, where a kid would come in with a broken arm and be like, well, did they break it on the jungle gym, or does it look like abuse? And the people at VEPT are trained to know what they're looking at, so that if it looks like abuse, how do we service it? And the last thing that my unit does is the Barrier-Free Justice Grant. So that is a grant that I actually head up, and it's a grant for victims of intimate partner violence and elder abuse that have intellectual disabilities. So, we see this often. We see folks that, not only are seniors now, but they're particularly vulnerable because they have some sort of intellectual or cognitive disability. And the grant is a federal grant and allows us to really put a lot of emphasis on the social services so that the folks that are impacted get the services that they need. So we take victims that are over the age of 60. However, because I have carte blanche to run this unit, A bulk of the cases that we're seeing are mentally ill adult children that are living in the home with the seniors. So what we've been trying to do is sort of pull cases of folks in their 50s where they're being abused by, older teenage kids, so 17, 18, 19, that have a diagnosis of mental illness. And the idea is if we pull those cases and prosecute them at the onset, that we can get those, and I'll get into what I mean, we can get them into programs so that we stop the abuse before it really snowballs. And we'll use the court system to do that. We take cases of physical abuse by family members, intimate partner abuse, and then we take abuse by caregivers, whether or not they're paid or unpaid. So if there's a home health aide in the home or a nurse's aide in the home, we will take those cases. We do not have jurisdiction in nursing homes. That goes through the Attorney General's office. However, the one distinction is if a family hires a private nurse to sort of service them in the nursing home separately, apart from the nursing home staff, and there's abuse that goes on between that person, and we have several cases of that, we will take those cases, but we don't have jurisdiction in the nursing homes per se. A lot of times our victims are not cooperative. Like I said before, they're not inclined to testify against their loved ones. So what we do is we do what's called an evidence-based prosecution, and we collect, different sorts of evidence that we don't require victims to testify to, and we can, try to use that evidence to go forward on a case. So we do that with, like, not to get too technical, but sometimes 911 calls, oftentimes 911 calls. Now we have a body cam. Every NYPD officer is equipped with the body cam. So patrol officers and DV officers. So we use body cam. We use statements made to EMS. We use statements made to the officers on the scene. All that compiled together, gives us an opportunity to prosecute a case without the victims. So we do that. So here you have ear witnesses, eyewitnesses, medical records, all that stuff is kind of how we make a case. And we've done them successfully. In fact, I just put, and when I say just, I want to say today's Wednesday, Monday. On Monday, I put a case into the grand jury that was an evidence-based prosecution, attempted murder. And I was able to do it with using statements by the victim to the EMS folks, and by the body cam video, and just photos taken of the injuries, and we got an indictment that way. So my unit is, because we deal with various family issues and dynamics, we are very, very dedicated and committed to non-jail alternatives. I know that people don't want their loved ones in jail, because the real truth is we are not going to jail our way out of elder abuse. Because really, when we talk about elder abuse, what are we talking about? 90% of the time, we're talking about addiction and we're talking about mental health. And we are not going to jail our way out of it. And, even if somebody abuses their mother, that mother is going to let them back in the house. It's hard to say no, for various reasons. So the idea is, once we get them into the criminal justice system, we try to use the brawn of the criminal justice system to force people into either mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment. And we have a mental health court and we have a drug treatment court. And really what we say to them is, if you complete this program, and sometimes it takes some people 6 months, it takes some people 6 years, because I, again, am a lawyer, I'm not a clinician, and every person is on their own path. And I don't prescribe a certain amount of time. I let the clinicians do it in mental health court and drug treatment court. And they really make their referrals, clinical decisions, and how long people have to be. But my point is, if you complete that program, then on the end of it, you'll have a very favorable disposition. It could be a misdemeanor, it could be less than a misdemeanor. It depends. We work with the families, we determine what will keep them safe and what they want. But we do have jail alternatives attached to it. If you fail to complete that program, you will go to jail. Some people go to jail for 30 days, some people go to jail for 7 years. It really depends on the circumstances. But it's helpful to have that jail alternative hanging over their head because it motivates people because nobody wants to go to jail. We also work with MICA programs, which are mentally ill and chemically addicted programs. MICA programs are really, really crucial to the work that we do because MICA programs are one of the only few ways to get people housing in this city. So it's really crucial that we maintain those connections. And orders of protection are our lifeline. They're the things that make people stay away. Oftentimes, even if people don't want to prosecute a case, they don't want their abuser back in the home. So we use those orders of protection for as long as we can, even if someone's not cooperative, to make sure that the perpetrator stays out of the home. So the DA's office is co-located with the Family Justice Center, which is really, really crucial because the Family Justice Center provides social services of every kind that the city has to offer. So when someone comes in for, an elder abuse case on the prosecutor side, we really can service them through every city agency, just 2 steps away from my office. So it's excellent. It's also excellent just for referrals and just, the practitioners on this call understand really what it means to throw around ideas and really kind of the more complex things have people be like, no, I have an idea. This is how we'll deal with it. And it's just great brainstorming. And I have to say, I've learned so much from the folks that work there. And it's really, they're not quite open yet. They're going to open at limited capacity in a week or 2, but I'm excited for them to come back because you feel the loss of it. We have a really important program, the Family Court Elder Abuse Order of Protection Project. So typically if somebody goes to family court and wants to get an order of protection, it takes a really, really, really long time. Whereas this way through this project, they can get it done in hours through by sitting in their own homes. They can do it virtually. So it's excellent. And all these services are available even if you're not, going forward with a criminal case, and everything is confidential. So these are just important numbers, and we'll make that available to you, anybody that wants it. But just for anyone that needs to call, that's really, these are the important, most relevant numbers right now. And I'll, we can go back to it, or you guys are welcome to have my slides. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be here at the end. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Michelle. What a great, and really in-depth presentation. Lots to think about. We appreciate that. So
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the elder law matter and planning side of it, and we'll welcome Debbie. Debbie, you're on. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hello, everybody. And again, Michelle, thank you. That was very informative. The reason why a lot of what you spoke about, you mentioned financial abuse, but truthfully, financial abuse in the elder law arena, I would love to be able to be in a position to avoid all types of, or help minimize all types of elder abuse, but certainly with respect to the financial component and the estate planning component, there are things that can be done proactively when people are vital and healthy that could potentially avoid abuse in the future. So Jackie, if you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to be quick because I do have a lot to cover. Just so that you know in advance, there are about 40 slides here, and there's no way I'm going to get to all of them because I know I have to save time for questions as well. So anybody who's interested in slides in all the slides can reach out to Jackie, and she will send you a set, because a lot of the slides do cover Medicaid planning and trusts, and I'm just unfortunately not going to get to that. I'm going to focus on a couple of things that I think will be helpful. So first of all, in terms of a plan to begin with, and I'll just cover this very briefly, there are various players that a person doing planning should resort to. And I'm not talking about overkill. You don't necessarily have to walk around with a staff of people, but to prepare the estate planning and the document preparation, typically people really should refer to an attorney who's experienced in the area, not a generalist. I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say, I have documents, I did them with, my cousin is a real estate attorney, he does closings, but he said he would do this for me as a courtesy. People mean well, but it really makes sense to go to somebody who specializes in this particular area. And depending on the nature of the assets that one owns, if you do have assets beyond owning real estate, meaning if you have brokerage accounts or mutual funds, it is important to have a financial advisor. And a good financial advisor will often be very much involved with your estate planning and know exactly what the elderly, the client has in terms of their actual documents. CPA is also an important person because they handle tax filings. They know the tax ramifications and the implications of various transactions. And finally, and I think Michelle made reference to this, geriatric care manager it's essentially a social worker who has a person who's trained. Many geriatric care managers also have nursing backgrounds, a nursing degree, but they are able to help an elderly person navigate various situations. I do want to get to documents, but I want to say that very often when people come in to do planning, and there is, again, there's a concern that an elderly person is vulnerable or might be taken advantage of. I agree with Michelle wholeheartedly. People are afraid of police officers. They're also sometimes very intimidated by attorneys, and also attorneys' fees, just the way it is, are typically more expensive than that of a geriatric care manager on an hourly rate. We will often recommend a geriatric care manager. I will say this is not necessarily something that involves planning, or until we can do planning, let's get that social worker in. And again, these people are often trained to ask the right person, to develop a comfort level with the client, so we can then attack the legal plan or figure out what's going on. But we get that geriatric care manager in initially to not only serve as a liaison between us and the client, but also to get in there and figure out what is in fact going on if we do have some concerns. Next slide, Jackie, please. So this is what I really want to focus on in the next, let's just say 15 minutes that I have. There are various documents that are necessary for every person to have. And I know this particular discussion is directed to the elderly and to elder abuse and elder fraud, but these documents are important for anybody to have, truthfully, once you reach majority age, once you own any property. But I'm going to touch upon what I feel is also so relevant right now to the elderly population. So the first document is essentially a last will and testament. People come into my office. I probably see, I've been doing this for a long time, thankfully. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy helping people, but people come in and I don't know what it is, but they'll always say, I need a will or I need a trust. And as if that is the most important document. The will is an important document. Basically, a will dictates how your assets are distributed when you pass away, when you die. And first of all, so the only reason why I want to stress that it's not always the most important document. So let's just say you have a widow who has 2 children. And she comes into my office and she says, I trust my 2 children implicitly and I want them to get my whole estate. Again, I'm not minimizing the need for a will, but if that particular woman died without a will, it wouldn't be the end of the world, because state law, it's not like that a person's assets go to the state when there is no will. I think that's a huge misconception. State law dictates, there's a whole set of rules, they're called the laws of intestacy, that provide guidance as to how assets are distributed if a person dies intestate, meaning without a will. And guess what? That widow, her assets would go to the 2 children anyway. So again, wills are very important. I'm going to explain in a few moments why a will is also very important in the context of elder fraud and abuse. The second document that is equally important, or why don't I say this? A will is something that goes into effect, even though you do it while you're alive, it only goes into effect when you die. And therefore, it has no impact while you're alive, other than to give the person who did the will the peace of mind that their affairs are in order, but it has no bearing on a person's affairs while they're alive. There are 3 other documents that are the exact opposite. They're only relevant while one is alive. And the first document, and the one I'm going to probably focus the most on, is the power of attorney. And I'm going to omit the statutory gift writer. I'll explain why. But the power of attorney is essentially a document that whereby you say, if for some reason I cannot manage my finances, I appoint so-and-so, whether it's a spouse or a child or a grandchild or a trusted friend, I appoint so-and-so to step in and act on my behalf with respect to all financial matters. So that's the power of attorney. And again, I'm going to elaborate on that shortly after I discuss the other 2 documents. The second document that again covers decision-making during a person's lifetime is a healthcare proxy. It's the medical counterpart to a power of attorney. Power of attorney covers financial decisions, financial matters, and healthcare proxy just covers health. Healthcare proxy, I tell this to people all the time. You sign your healthcare proxy. It doesn't mean your agent could then go in the next day and demand that you have cataract surgery. It only kicks in if you yourself, the person who has the healthcare proxy, is unable through incapacity or for whatever reason is just unable to make their own medical decisions. The last of the 3 advanced directives is the living will. And the living will, unlike it's nothing to do with assets, not a last will and testament, it basically is a directive for the agent on the healthcare proxy. The sole purpose of the healthcare proxy is to provide guidance, to appoint a person to make the medical decisions, but the living will elaborates on the person's wishes. Namely, a typical living will is going to say, if I'm at the end of my life, there's no hope of recovery, I don't want heroic measures taken. Living trusts, unfortunately, is probably beyond the scope of what I can cover today. Suffice it to say that it is also an important document, but when I say the 5 most important documents, not everyone needs a trust, meaning a trust is a document that dictates how a person's assets are distributed when they die, very similar to a will. But unlike a will that only goes into effect when you die, living trust is the document. It's created while you're alive, and you actually go through the process during your lifetime of transferring your assets into the trust. So as I say to my clients, visualize an envelope. I create an envelope for you while you're alive, and you put your assets, when I say put, you retitle your bank accounts, you retitle your real estate in the name of the trust. So for example, my house would no longer be owned by Debby Rosenfeld. I would do a new deed indicating the Debby Rosenfeld Living Trust. That's the new owner of the house. And living trusts are not necessary for everyone. There are certain instances where a living trust is imperative, where we want to avoid probate for whatever reason, or where the notion of managing the person's assets is so important. I have many clients who are alone. They're not married, or they're widowed, or they have no children, or their children live very far away. And in an effort to protect them, they transfer their assets to a trust, not necessarily for Medicaid planning per se, but it enables the trustee to step in and to govern and manage all these assets in case the person becomes incapacitated. So it's very important. First of all, it's important to have these documents and to do the planning. But it's important to review these documents periodically. I just met with a woman yesterday, and she looked at her power of attorney. That's part of our process. We say to people, bring in your documents. First of all, we're not looking to reinvent the wheel, but furthermore, bring in your documents so that we can review them. And the woman was horrified to see that her niece was named as agent on her power of attorney. This niece is, she's estranged from this niece. The document was done like 5-6 years ago. The niece actually has the original power of attorney, which I think was a very big mistake. And this woman just, you know, I said, that document, that's dangerous in your niece's hands. And so now we're going to start the process of sending, putting the niece on alert legally that that power of attorney has been revoked and is null and void. And we're also going to send the new power of attorney coupled with the revocation of the old power of attorney to any financial institution that this woman, wherever she has assets, to avoid any type of abuse down the road. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I already mentioned the last will and testament. Again, COVID-19 showed us that we are all, you know, it reminded us, I should say, of our mortality. I can't begin to tell you, you know, some people had a bit of a break during COVID in terms of employment, things slowed down. We have not stopped. In a sad way. I'm happy that we were able to help people, but in the beginning, I'm talking about last March, 2020, we were, and how difficult it was because we couldn't go to nursing homes, we couldn't go to hospitals where people were really dying and they wanted their affairs to be in order. We were unfortunately very, very busy. So obviously, don't wait for an emergency and try to take care of all of these documents. The time to do it is when you're feeling good. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so Jackie, I'd actually like you to go to the following slide. So there is a new power of attorney out there. The law came about, I think, in December, and it was passed. And the proposed changes went into effect on June 13th. So the old power of attorney, and it's so interesting because I have been practicing for a long time, and I'm so used to saying the new power of attorney, meaning the one that was passed, or the one that came into effect in 2009. That was the first time that the Bar Association and the elder law, I guess the elder law lobby, realized how dangerous, I take that back, how important the power of attorney is, but also how dangerous it is in the wrong hands. And so and I'm talking about the changes that were initiated in 2009. The feeling was that on a two-sided Blumberg power of attorney form, there could be, all you had to have was a provision, again, power of attorney. The principal is the person who signs it and is giving power to an agent to sign on their behalf with respect to financial matters. And in this very short form, it was very, very possible to generate fraud. And I'm sure there were many cases out there, but one specific case where a nephew just relied on a very sparse power of attorney that allowed for gifting. And he basically wiped out his uncle's estate shortly before the uncle died. And the way this all came to a head was that the Salvation Army, who had been named as a beneficiary of the man's will, got wind of the fact that his estate was basically wiped out with the use of a power of attorney, and they challenged it. And actually, so the Salvation Army prevailed, but it also was the impetus for new rules. My point is that in 2009, new law came into effect with a separate gift writer. And the thrust of the form, the thrust of the new form was that when I, Debbie Rosenfeld, sit down with my client and sign this power of attorney, where I say to my client, you need to appoint, let's just say, your son to step in and sign on behalf of you with respect to financial matters, if you are unable to do so for whatever reason. Now, the whole ability to make gifts was put into a separate section. And the hope was, and the separate part called the gift rider would have to be witnessed by 2 individuals. And so the thought was that if I'm whipping out this rider for my client to sign, there's going to be a conversation. And hopefully the client is going to be cautioned about how much power is inherent in giving somebody the ability to make gifts. So anyway, fast forward 11 years, and again, a commission is formed to evaluate the old changes. They decided to eliminate the gift rider. So the reason being that, you know, sometimes the gift rider gets lost. Sometimes a person, I can't tell you how many of our clients mis-executed the form that they had, so that the gift rider, which they intended to be of use, was considered null and void. Institutions had a very hard time with it. And so for various reasons, the new law now and the new power of attorney as a result, again, effective June 13th, no longer has a gift rider. However, and then the other thing was the old law, which I totally agree that this should be changed. The old law said for 2009 forms, it has to, my form, in order for the form that Ronald Fatoullah and Associates prepares and has many clients sign, a myriad of clients, the form has to comport with the statute exactly. And if there's one word that's off, it's no longer considered a statutory power of attorney, and therefore financial institutions do not have to recognize it. So essentially, the new law basically says, as long as I substantially conform with the language of the statute, I should be okay, and my power of attorney should be respected. The signing requirements have also changed. And now, whereas before only the statutory gift rider had to be witnessed by 2 people, now the entire signing of the form and the person's signature has to be witnessed. The biggest problem that we have had, and you know, this is where there's a clear juxtaposition between what Michelle talked about and what I do for a living. The conflict is that clients come in and we want to give them as much leverage as possible to have their loved ones step in and help them in a situation where they become incapacitated. So again, obviously we have to evaluate each situation, but our goal is we encourage these powers of attorneys to be signed. You know, I tell clients, if you don't sign a power of attorney, I feel like I'm remiss as an elder law attorney. To me, that is the most important document. Why? Because after you die, you're no longer here. I mean, I know that's very basic, but I'm much more concerned with how a person's affairs are managed while they are alive. And the power of attorney goes a long way in helping a person's financial life continue in a fluid way, even if there is incapacity. However, then you have the DA's office, they come along and they're 100% right. There's elder abuse, there's fraud. And so these forms, you know, as much as I want to make sure that there's no duress involved, very often people come in and have their relatives sign these powers of attorney and are given huge powers, and there's elder abuse going on because the people really are not, don't have the person's best interest at heart. So that's just, that's something, all I'm saying is that the job does fall on the attorney not to just have the client sign these forms willy-nilly. We have to do a lot of investigating. That's why, you know, I sit down at a consult, and I know that unfortunately I really am running out of time, but I'll speak for just 2 more minutes. But I'll sit at a consult, and my consultations are usually an hour to an hour and a half to sometimes 2 hours long. And sometimes the clients will say to me, you know, why are you asking all these questions? That's exactly why I'm asking them, so that basically I want to make sure that my client who is executing these documents and appointing various agents to carry on their lives in case they become incapacitated, I want to make sure that there is trust. I want to make sure, I want to avoid fraud to the best of my ability. And that's why the best time to do these documents is not when you start aging or you start developing mild cognitive impairment, the best time to do these documents is when you are vital, when you are able, lucid and able to make decisions. And I'm just gonna tie in why does a will come into play? Why is that important in this particular case? Because a person's will is helpful to me in showing what the client's intent was. So I'll give you an example. If I have a son who comes in, and again, Michelle made reference to this, beware of changes in the person's life, of a child moving in. So let's say I have a son who insinuates himself in mom's house, and yeah, you know, very coincidental to hear the son is not working, not because he lost a job, but because he no longer chooses to work because he has to take care of mom. Again, sometimes these people are the best people and the best children, but very often there is sometimes planning a person like that, I'm extremely dubious. But if the son comes in and says, you know, my mom is having some memory issues and she needs to do all of her documents, redo all of her documents, well, that woman's former will is going to be very helpful to me to see, well, how did she treat the son in the past? Was this son appointed as an agent 5 years ago when she did her documents? Was he supposed to get 75% of her estate 5 years ago when she did her documents or whenever she did them? So it is helpful to me in determining, in getting a better taste of if there is any undue influence or abuse going on. So again, there are so much more things to say. Just realize again, the thing I want to stress as the last thing I'm going to say, even though the statutory gift rider has been eliminated, make sure that you do this kind of planning with an attorney, because even though there's no longer a separate gift rider, we now incorporate that gift. Your standard statutory power of attorney is not going to have any ability to make large gifts. It's going to be a very small amount. We want, again, if there's trust and if there's a trustworthy agent, we want the agent to be able to make gifts on behalf of the principal, because that might be necessary down the road if there's some kind of medical emergency, a medical catastrophe where Medicaid planning is required. So we want to make sure that that language is incorporated, and that is something that has to be included. That is something that has to be drafted. I can say with certainty, as I stand before you, that any person who has come to me in an emergency, and when I say emergency, that means often that the client's parent, the client's mother, the client's father can no longer sign, can no longer do planning. In that emergency, if a power of attorney is presented to me that was not prepared by an elder law attorney, I will say that 95% of the time, it is not sufficient to do the kind of planning that we need to do. So if you walk away with anything, please, again, please keep in mind the importance of a power of attorney, as well as the other documents I mentioned, but also the importance that they be prepared by the proper attorney, somebody who's really well-versed in this area. It's not enough to print one off of the internet. It's just not going to provide the kind of planning that you might ultimately need. And just, again, Jackie, thank you. The one I keep on saying, it's the last thing I'm going to say, but I really want to be aware of your time. 2 witnesses have to witness the form, but one of them can also be the notary. So a notary is required plus a second witness. But if you have somebody who's a potential recipient of a gift, that person cannot serve as a witness. And finally, the other thing that the law changed that was very, very helpful, if the principal has complete capacity, but is physically disabled so that he or she cannot sign the form, or can only sign it with difficulty, the principal now can legally allow a third party to sign on his or her behalf. So, okay, thank you all so much. I could go on and on, but please feel free to reach out to Jackie if you want a copy of all the slides.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. That was really, really incredible information, certainly. And then you can tie it into the fact of, with oversight and with good counsel, how you could possibly, potentially avoid some of these things too. So are there any questions that anybody has at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
Is
go
the
ahead, Linda.
power of attorney a federal document rather than statewide? So if somebody's in a different state, it doesn't matter? Or and do you have to redo it if it was done already a couple of years ago, but do you have to do it again now?
Okay, so two great questions, and I'll be quick. Power of attorney is singular to each state, meaning that, and there are some states that are stricter than others. New York is a strict state. So if I have a client who moves here from Florida, the first thing I'm going to tell them is get yourself a New York statutory power of attorney, meaning every state has power of attorney laws, but every state has different laws. So the form is going to look different in every state. And so I always advise people, especially for New York, get yourself a new one. And then as for getting a new power of attorney now, because the law changed, as long as you had a form that was a statutory form prior to June 13th, it's completely grandfathered. It's totally fine. So as long as it was done and it's comprehensive, you don't have to redo and you don't have to do a new one now just because the law changed. But if somebody came to me now with a form that was done after June 13th of this year, but it's an old form, that will not be accepted and that will have to be redone.
And what if it was opposite, if it was made in New York and somebody's now in Florida?
Okay, so every state is different. I have heard, so Florida, for example, Florida requires 2 witnesses on their form. Until June 13th, our power of attorney in New York did not require 2 witnesses for the whole form, just for the statutory gift writer. If I knew somebody has property, if I know somebody has property in New York, or at the time, I would make sure we added 2 witnesses, and typically that was accepted in Florida. But I still, just to be cautious, I say, go to an attorney in Florida. Again, I don't want my clients running around but people don't move every 5 minutes. So if you are relocating or if you have real property in another state, it's probably advisable to have a power of attorney in that state as well.
Good,
Debbie,
Yes.
if someone has a power of attorney and it's grandfathered in, can it still be challenged though, or?
Any power of attorney can be challenged, but what the law is trying to do is they're trying to make it, again, there's this push and pull. They want to minimize abuse, but by the same token, what good is it if you pay me a significant legal fee? I mean, I don't mean significant, I mean, any legal fee is significant. You pay me money to do this nice fancy form, and then you bring it to a bank and they don't recognize it. So the law is trying to make it more difficult for financial institutions to challenge it. There are a lot of measures being put in, including the ability to recoup attorney's fees, etc. So anybody can challenge it, but that's why if you do it with an attorney,
Right.
Anytime one of my clients has a problem, guess what I do? I get on the phone. I say, I need to speak to your legal department right now. And most often I am able to prevail because they're violating the law if they don't recognize the power of attorney that was done
Prior to.
Well, it's not even prior to, that was just done under under regular circumstances. That's witnessed, that where the signature is fine. Banks and financial institutions shouldn't have the right to reject it just because they don't feel like, because it's not their own form.
Right. One more question. What if someone's power of attorney was executed on the 2010 form after June 13th, but now they lack capacity? Does that then have to be a guardianship, or?
Yes. So this is what I'm going to say. So in other words, just to confirm your question, the attorney, whoever did the form, used an old form after June 13th. Any financial institution is not obligated to respect that form. Sometimes banks do. Clients have showed me really, really bare bones bare bone forms that banks have recognized. But when you're talking about advanced planning or anything, you're taking a leap. You might
Right.
have to do a guardianship.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There is one more question. How do you find a geriatric care manager outside of New York City?
Okay, I think that there is a listing someplace. I know that that's not a terribly comprehensive answer, but for example, somebody might call me up, somebody who I've met with and says, I'm moving to North Carolina. Do you know of anybody to recommend? So geriatric care managers in New York could potentially refer you to somebody else. But I remember thinking that there is some kind of registry that's national, but I could be wrong about that. But at this point, I would just say word of mouth, call somebody, call an elder law attorney, so for example, if you need a geriatric care manager in Colorado or in Denver, Colorado, you either call an attorney here and they give you the name of another attorney in Colorado, because elder law attorneys and geriatric care managers work hand in hand all the time. And I assume that's true in every state.
Yeah, there is a national association.
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
There is a national association, and then there is, the word of mouth, angle as well. So, most times it's, for New York, it's a lot of times it's Florida, as it turns out. That just happened to me recently. So, any other questions, comments? Well, so I'm sure that there are lots of information and lots of wisdom here, and I hope that everybody was able to learn something that they didn't hear before. So and use that accordingly, and certainly use us as resources, etc. When necessary. Linda, do you want to wrap up?
Yes, I wanted to thank our presenters for fabulous information. There's always way more information than we can ever cover in these things. So perhaps we'll do another one sometime as a follow-up, but thank you both so much. It was very full and very rich and really jam-packed. And for the people who participated and listened, again, if you want slides, to be in touch with Jackie, or if you need to, you could be in touch with me. My name was on the flyer. So it was linda@scclive.org. You could be in touch with me as well about it. So that's really it. I really want to thank you all. It was really a very fabulous presentation, and I'm glad we recorded it, and we can, we'll be able to post it so that people can access that information at another time.
It truly
thank
was.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
It's great.
Michelle, for all the hard work you and your team do. I mean, it's such a big problem, and thank you for being out there in the trenches and trying to, making a difference for these folks.
I work for you guys, but thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Have a
Good
good
night,
night,
everyone.
everybody. Stay
Good
safe.
night.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Debbie.
Thank you.